Kishore, you want to kick it off?
Thanks everyone. Good to see a lot of you again, and some people who have been in touch with but haven't seen on these calls. This is, as I mentioned, a summary of various things that we've been working on collectively over the past. It's been months now, not weeks anymore, right, Gautam?
Yeah, it feels like that.
Yes, and I know that some of you have asked me to share this, and this has been cooking to the last minute. So if I haven't been able to share in advance, we can definitely share this presentation right after this. So, with that said, a lot of the work is to do with the River's Edge related items, and we worked with Gautam on this. But I'll let Gautam walk through the presentation, and I'll chime in as we go along.
Okay. Thanks, Kishore. And so a lot of the work that you see is, really integrated with the work that Kishore, Devanshi, and the team have been leading. So what we try to do is really summarize all of this to make it a sort of a good synopsis of sort of the overall work that we've been doing for the last month or a little over that. So from a methodology standpoint, our process really was to, when we think about the River's Edge, we think about all of the, transportation corridors that are currently being designed and all of the spatial parameters, and we're looking at feet and inches for lane widths and shoulders. And we felt that if we only focus on those transportation corridors, we're not going to be able to address or think about what it means from a riverfront standpoint. And to really address from a riverfront standpoint, not just restoring it to what it is right now, we really want this to be something that is progressive, but also is thought as part of this entire infrastructure systems themselves. And so in order to sort of evolve that thinking, we really took a diligent process of first analyzing, understanding what are those existing natural systems that are there, really looking at what the infrastructure systems we have with all of the outfalls and the stormwater infrastructure that we have right now, understanding what those challenges and conditions are, but then also to look forward as to what are the impacts of climate change, especially from flooding conditions and from extreme heat, and understanding what those impacts are on the riverfront edge. And then looking at not just the throat as one section, but to really think about the riverfront as a diverse condition all the way from River Street to the BU Bridge. And so that, along with a series of precedents and looking at different examples around us and what we learned from the analysis, we developed a toolkit of strategies. And then we sort of took those strategies and then employed them back to start to think about this as a framework that's grounded by a series of guiding principles that really sets this up with a series of natural strategies, really employs a lot of the urban design and connectivity, and then really establishes this as new ecosystems that start to promote the ecological benefits that we would like to see, and really set a strong attitude of what the riverfront vision should be. So starting from analysis, and Kishore, feel free to chime in and add, is to really looking at the existing conditions, where we have the bridges and what do we have from the existing right-of-way for the roadways, the existing location for the pedestrian walkways, which are currently being shared by cyclists and pedestrians altogether, and looking at a lot of those constrained conditions as well. The PDW path.
So Gautam, just go back
sure.
one. Sorry, the one thing that we've been looking at above and beyond just looking at the throat and the rest of the system is the BU Bridge Grand Junction nexus there, and how might we link the Paul Dudley White path to the urban system that exists at multiple complicated levels. Mm-hmm. So you'll see some ideas. One of them is clearly the Paul Dudley White path as it passes underneath the BU Bridge. Very constrained, very unsafe to have both pedestrians and bikes going around the abutment. There is right-of-way underneath the left image next to Soldiers Field Road that requires some rearrangement of Grand Junction Bridge to cut through, which is probably not in here. But can we just go straight essentially instead of doing that sort of a dog-leg movement underneath the bridge while still preserving that for pedestrians? Can the bikes go straight through? And also, can we connect from BU Bridge as you're coming from Cambridge and Grand Junction in a meaningful way down to the river? and unidentified paths. So these are some of the places where we paid attention.
Right. And so then starting to analyze, so this is looking at a map, which is basically, this is River Street over here. This is BU Bridge, as Kishore was just describing. And what this lays out is the on-grade condition, which shows the realigned Soldiers Field path, the realigned Interstate 90, and the Grand Junction and the train tracks as well associated with that. What we've done is we basically analyzed this condition against all of those criteria that we were talking about earlier. And for us, that began with understanding what the riverbed condition itself is. So this basically reflects the contours or the topography at the riverbed condition that really starts to highlight, where do we have the steep slopes? Where do we have the shallow sections where we can start to create opportunities for introducing aquatic habitats, but then also to look at the edge condition along with the land side as well, to think about where the erosion issues are, which is a very prevalent issue and is a major issue along the entire Charles River edge condition, where sediments and pollutants are being directly discharged into the river edge itself. So to look at opportunities where we can start to really make those as a shallow section itself. This graphic starts to now marry the riverbed topography with the landside topography. The reds are basically where it's the highest, and then going from the highest through down to the greens. And to really understand where do we have those flat areas where we can start to make interventions of stormwater, BMPs, and other interventions that could actually help us deal with a lot of the stormwater issues, but also other ecological aspects as well. Then looking at the infrastructure itself, this is something that it's been talked a lot about, especially with the Salt Creek infrastructure line, which basically drains a significant amount of watershed. And MassDOT, I believe, has said that they're not touching that. What we wanted to really do is highlight all of the existing infrastructure that is culminating to 3 CSOs that are directly outflowing into the riverbed, into the river corridor. And this is basically all the pollutants, the trash that is currently being discharged directly. So you can see it, graphically through these plumes. That's really bringing a lot of pollutants that have caused aquatic die-off. So that's one. The second is all of the road. Yes, go ahead, Pallavi.
Can I just quickly clarify? I know it was just mentioned in terms of CSOs. Those are not CSOs. The CSOs are just on the other side of the river, marked in green, because a lot of people have emailed me to confirm that. Those are systems that are just taking stormwater from a larger drainage area.
Okay. So this is basically just the drainage, but these are still direct outfalls. Yes, you can see those. Yes. These are the images of what they are. There is no pre-treatment. There is no way of collecting it, pre-treating it before being discharged direct into the river.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that. So in addition to that, we've located all of those drain connections that basically discharge all of the stormwater from the roadways directly into the river as well, which sort of brings the salts and the oils, the sand, and other pollutants as well discharging into the river edge. So this really starts to highlight we've got some serious infrastructure issues, and it would be a missed opportunity not to address this as part of reimagining the riverfront edge. And then along with that, to really look at the flooding conditions as well. While this is really looking at elevations, what we tried to do is look at what the projected elevations would be for 2070 for a 100-year storm or a 1% storm, and to look at where are those flooding conditions. And you can see sort of highlighted in here. We've also started to map out where some landside drainage flooding conditions are also there that would lead us to think about landside strategies. And I know, Pallavi, you've been trying to think about a very integrated approach which looks at strategies of managing water and collecting water before it is being discharged towards the riverfront. So I think coupled with both of these strategies, not only along the riverfront edge, but also on the land side, would definitely immensely be helpful. So looking at from a resiliency standpoint to really think about how we incorporate areas for storage and also to improve the flooding conditions of our infrastructure as well. Then looking at the ecology and the habitat as well. Currently, the conditions along that edge are sort of really fairly harsh. There's a lot of pavement. There are trees, but significant portions on a lot of those trees are dead, or they're not really providing adequate shade on some of the pedestrian walkways, which are constrained along them. The edge condition itself is very steep, and the plant materials have a lot of invasive species. Typically, what you'd want to see are plant materials that have a lot more biodiversity, but also help stabilize the slope as well. In order to do that, you have to have a really strategic way of thinking about the entire ecology and the edge condition, and also looking at how it helps on the aquatic habitat side too. And the direct relationship of this is with extreme heat. So this is a map that really looks at the surface temperatures, and the reds are always the highest, which is close to 95 degrees. What we're trying to highlight is when you don't have a buffer against the riverfront edge and it's all pavement up to it, how hot the river's edge condition gets. And that does relate to aquatic die-off. It also relates to how algae blooms are occurring. And I know there has been a lot of conversation and recent events that with algae blooms along the Charles River too. And in contrast, when you look across on the Cambridge side, the difference is nearly 10% when you have a green space at the riverfront edge itself. So to really think about how do we create green and create buffer will really help us think about extreme heat and really mitigating those effects of urban heat island. And then finally, at the surface, sort of looking at the edge condition itself to look at dimensionally sort of what are the constraints we have. And so, the width really from the edge of the curb ranges from 9 feet. Of course, where we get to the green side, it gets to the highest, about nearly 150 feet wide, but then it starts to get constrained back. And then we nearly have about a 450 feet edge condition where we pretty much have no width. So how do we incorporate the Paul Dudley White path? How do we incorporate a number of these ecological strategies and landscape strategies along this entire edge that give us those greater benefits? So this really helped us understand what those edge conditions are, not only spatially, but also physically, looking at, where there is stone or where there's steep slopes or things like
that. Excuse me, just one question. These dimensions are measured from the edge of the river to the proposed edge of the all that grade future condition?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so all of the analysis that you see is based on the on-grade condition. Every single one of them. And then sort of looking at those edge conditions spatially as well, and I'll probably go through this a little faster in the spirit of time. So what we did is, rather than just focusing on the throat, we started from the River Street. So this is sort of looking at section A and highlight what are the constraints along all of those edge conditions and where we have opportunities for incorporating bolder strategies. So with section A, where we're basically coming right off the Soldiers Field ramp, we only have about a 9 feet wide width that's left after the edge of the curb and to this existing stone wall there. So how do we incorporate a multimodal path, and how do we even incorporate some kind of green buffer along there? As we get closer towards section B, C, and D, we start to see that we have a lot more dimension that allows us to create much more of a robust interventions from wetlands and stormwater strategies, but also to look at opportunities about how can we pull those outfall structures that are currently daylighting directly into the river. Can we cut them back like some of the other examples? And we'll share those as well. So as we start to get closer and closer to what has been called the throat, and when you get to those conditions, so you can see over here, which is basically section G, where you have a stretch of nearly 450 feet plus or minus, where we have no available width from the edge of Soldiers Field Road and the existing shoreline. So we have some suggestions on how we can incorporate those. And then as we get closer to the BU Bridge, the complexity, as Kishore was talking about, with the new rail connection with Soldiers Field Road, and then how do we really use a landscape system or a strategy that helps us mitigate those pedestrian connectivity all the way up to the BU Bridge, which currently don't exist right now. So with that, we sort of looked at some case studies of successful examples. This is Hunters Point and Waterfront, where it was not only reimagined as infrastructure, but it was also reimagined as part of a park that really sort of there's an academic value, but also an appreciation from a recreation standpoint about how these infrastructure systems really became a place of celebration. And they dealt with a lot of the similar issues, being right next to some prominent vehicular corridors as well. Very much within Boston, the Charles Gate by the Muddy River, where they're capping an existing outfall structure into pre-treatment wetlands. But then that is also being celebrated as part of a passive and a recreation system with dog parks, open space, and other environmental values, benefits as well. Within those projects, there are also some great strategies about how water from the roadways are collected into quality structures before they are being daylit into the natural river condition or the edge condition itself. Thinking about infrastructure as well, how can we collect a lot of the stormwater runoff, create pre-treatment, but also this is right here in Boston by Ink Block. It's a very successful infrastructure and done in a very contemporary way, but also becomes a very programmable and a park-like and adds more value as a park system too. And just some other examples about how living shorelines have been accomplished, how circulation multimodal circulation systems have been incorporated as part of that. So really drawing upon all of these precedents and what we learned from the analysis, we sort of established a toolkit of two categories of strategies. One are basically naturalized edge conditions, about how we can make that as a living shoreline. How do we incorporate a lot of the circulation systems as part of it? And how do we also start to create opportunities about how we create aquatic habitat benches and other ways to really start to bring back that river life and really softness along that entire edge. And similarly, when we are up against infrastructure or built environments, how do we continue to have those kind of sort of benefits about how we think about those edge conditions, whether we're coming up right against a riverfront, how do we armor the slope or make opportunities for stepping down that allows us to engage with the riverfront, or also having opportunities with boardwalks in minimal locations that could actually not impede so much on the shadows and the aquatic life, but ways that we can help sort of create some of the circulation paths. And so we said, okay, let's take these strategies and look back at those sections and say, okay, how do we address each of those conditions that we were looking at? So starting with section A, looking at that 9-foot dimension right now that we have is, can we incorporate a well-planted verge that really helps us create that buffer, but also has enough dimension that will help it survive. And also from longevity, we reviewed a lot of these strategies with Pallavi and team, and we also had folks from the BSA and BSLA giving us input on this with Weston and Sampson as well. So we incorporated a lot of their suggestions on what we felt were appropriate strategies and to get the accurate dimensions as well. And then looking at a multimodal sort of a shared path of bike lane and a pedestrian walkway of nearly 20 feet wide, and it'll have to get cantilevered above past the wall itself to incorporate that. And then as we get closer, where we have a little more dimension with the green spaces, to incorporate areas where we could have those pre-treatment and wetlands, where those not only are stormwater infrastructure, but they also become spaces where you can actually engage and become open space systems where you can participate and walk through as part of this as a larger park. This is the existing shoreline, just for reference. And what we're suggesting is right now what's been a very steep slope is to make that a much more gradual slope, so that starts to establish a much softer and a living shoreline along that entire edge condition. And so you start to see this as a combination of open spaces, wide walkways and promenades that separate bike lanes and pedestrian walkways. And in some locations, where those outfall structures are, which were previously located right up at the edge, can we cut them and cap them and really daylight that water into wetlands where we can collect the water, treat the water, clean out all of the trash, and also create storage opportunities before it's been led into the river corridor. These also become opportunities for creating overlooks that you can start to look at and really appreciate views not only across the river, but also when you have events too. And then as we get closer to opportunities where we can make connectivity across, let's say, for example, the Aganis Way, is to think about not just as from an accessibility standpoint, really think about introducing berms as a way of creating the sort of a natural barrier between all of the roadways and also on the Cambridge side, but these could also become at the ADA accessible slope of under 5% as they start to ramp up to locations where we can now start to connect across to the Gannis Way. These also become places where you can start to separate the bikes and the pedestrians, and then really create very unique and diverse conditions that really make this a very sort of bucolic and active landscape itself. And as we get closer and closer towards the throat condition, to think about how do we start to collect all of the stormwater runoff, now with having the Pike and the Soldiers Field Road on the same elevation, is there a strategy about how we can collect all of the water and then they are passed through some treatment quality structures here, and once the sediments in the pollutants are taken out of it, and that's when they get discharged along the edge, like some of the examples shown earlier. These kind of piers and these boardwalks itself without really affecting the aquatic habitat below. And then when we have the most constrained condition, do we look at opportunities where we have maybe the bike lane right up against the Soldiers Field Road with some kind of a visual screen and a noise screen? And then do we start to have the pedestrians as part of a boardwalk that could be much more part of the river corridor? And in some places, maybe it comes back closer next to the bike lane, like this example. And so to look at different ways we could think about creating diverse conditions. And then maybe as we're getting closer back to the Bew Bridge, they come back together. As you see in this condition, we can incorporate the bioswale here again to collect a lot of the water as well. And as we get closer to the Bew Bridge, starting to think about how we incorporate those natural berms that start to now, at an ADA accessible path, we can connect up to the Bew Bridge. And we have some visuals as well to look at that. And so sort of looking at those from a series of landscape strategies, and Kishore, maybe you might want to sort of think about how we've looked at this as an overall framework of connectivity as well.
Yeah, I think this is pretty well covered so far. Again, it's connection, Bew Bridge connections, and also potentially looking at the connection along the Allston neighborhood, behind the neighborhood between the tracks to Cambridge Street.
Yep.
So we're looking at all of those connections and how they can all be resolved through creative grading and also turning them into elegant solutions, which you'll see in a moment.
So this is sort of a view of the existing conditions right now. I don't think it needs any more description. But the idea was then how do you visualize this framework of different types of strategies into what really sets up not only a new sort of a functioning and a living landscape along the entire edge of the riverfront, but also starts to make those kind of connectivity into the neighborhood. So here you can see a potential connection to the Gannis Way, connection to Allston neighborhood towards Cambridge Street, and then also this is looking at the Bew Bridge as well. And so we'll have enlargements of all of these to show the different examples. But here the idea really was, so if you have the main circulation spine of a promenade of the bikeways and the pedestrian ways along the edge, but then you also have opportunities of trying to create those kind of wetlands and interventions with these sort of oxbows that allow for water to come in. And not only do they provide the sort of recreation path systems, but also incorporate a lot of those kind of stormwater strategies or wetlands, resiliency, stormwater management as part of those strategies as well, and completely soften that entire edge condition as well. So with that, we'll just sort of zoom into some of these enlargements, and Kishore, maybe you can we can walk this through together. But here the idea was sort of if you had sort of that wide promenade along Soldiers Field Road. And if you had a boardwalk along the edge as well, that boardwalk could continue to meet with the existing below the BU bridge, but also we could have this to be at an ADA accessible path that really allows us to make those kind of circulation systems. You can follow my cursor all the way up to the BU bridge, but also to think about this as ways of really incorporating new spaces where you could imagine this to be this great new overlook, which becomes a way of appreciating and looking down for events, or being part of, just being part of the way we engage with the river with a series of these moments as well. And then with pedestrian connections on both sides of the Grand Junction.
Yeah, I think it could work with either side. I know that there may be options there in terms of how the Grand Junction pedestrian trail may come out. So if you're on the upstream, it'll work differently versus the downstream, but both can be connected, but it'll work as a part of the BU bridge connection system as well. You can go both towards the Paul Dudley White path, but also go up to the city at the upper level to the BU bridge. Exactly. And you also see the Paul Dudley White path splitting right under Grand Junction. One stretch goes directly under the arch of the BU bridge straight in. The other one maintains the existing connection, which is somewhat narrow, but both are shown in this case. Mm-hmm. And you'll see some options down the throat in terms of how these two systems converge.
Right, and this white dotted line sort of reflects the existing shoreline. So just to highlight that, we're trying not to encroach there, but to really restore that edge into a much more regenerative edge condition. So as Kishore said, goal is to give as much flexibility as possible from a circulation system standpoint. And then sort of looking...
Go back one, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go back one. So we do understand that a triangular parcel is owned by BU, and at some point there should be a building enclosing ComAv intersection, providing for a nice edge. Any connection we're showing should be presumably incorporated into that building eventually.
Right. It'll actually help activate that and really make a strong connection too. Okay. And then, so when we looked at the throat condition and in conversations with Glenn and others, we sort of developed a series of options over here. So the first option sort of could be the baseline option where the bike lane and the pedestrians are right up against the Soldiers Field Road. So what we've done is we've incorporated a visual screen, which could also be a sound barrier, and a visual screen as well, and then create a stepped condition. So you have the bike lane, which is about 14 feet wide, and then an 8 feet wide pedestrian. And we've shown in this condition a stepped where that way it separates the cyclists and the pedestrians, but it also starts to give this as an edge where you could be sitting along and looking out at the river and to be really closer to the river edge condition. And this stepped condition also helps us, sort of separate from all the noise and the traffic and, be away from that. It gives us a little bit more buffer. So that was sort of a base option. And this is a view you've seen before of what that boardwalk could be with the bike lane and the pedestrians. The second was, are there opportunities where we can further enhance? And I know we've talked about other ways to really, in our lifetime, hopefully we will see Charles River to be swimmable. And if we can start to incorporate a lot of those programming opportunities to really engage with the water, other ways we could start to, peel away with the boardwalk and creating platforms. And we see many of these examples all over Europe, but other ways we can incorporate that allow us to really program this as part of the river, make these unique areas and moments that become those celebrated moments and popular destinations. And then similarly, the third example would be a way of looking at is if we had to make this an elevated condition, which would directly connect from the BU bridge all the way out towards the Gannis Way. We could have that could be treated as the wide promenade at the elevated level with as a very architectural element with a screen. But you could also have a much more narrower sort of a boardwalk along the river's edge that allows you to also engage with the riverfront as much as possible. So it gives you the dual experience of either being elevated above that makes the connectivity across more easily, but also gives you the opportunity to engage more with the river if you want to be closer to the riverfront as well. So 3 different options about when we think about the throat condition, which is at the most constrained dimension right now. And this is a potential view about how we can really activate that, make it much more architectural, get these amazing views across as well. And then lastly, coming out to the Agganis Way connection, the idea of, you have the Agganis Way sidewalk, and is there an option where you could just come right off the sidewalk onto a bridge connection that would lead us to what could be a new plaza or a new great moment at the end of it, which could, we were looking at this in plan and analyzing it from the view standpoint, you get these amazing views from this point looking up towards Regatta and other events over here. So it'd be a great opportunity for sort of you come off of this to this overlook that gives you these great views, but then also becomes a way, because you'll be elevated, use advantage of that berm as a way of stepping down. These could become informal amphitheaters with some kind of a platform that overlooks on top of the river, but to really make a very special place that anchors the bridge from the Agganis Way and really starts to make those stronger connections across. So whether you're connecting at the BU Bridge or the Agganis Way or even towards Allston Landing to really celebrate those corners. Kishore, do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, keep going. It's
okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, so this is basically the same view. Now I'm looking at it from the Agganis Way. This is the existing condition, but what the team has done is really model what the massed out option is. You can see sort of the cage of the bridge below the below I90 that would connect you across, and what kind of a cage condition that would be. You see the crosswalks across, and so can we reimagine this to be something that is, first of all, a robust multimodal sort of circulation system with the bike lanes and the pedestrian walkways? But what it also does is then you see that bridge across and you're above all of the traffic and all the roadways, and it just adds another great moment about how you engage. So now you're connecting to the river, and that's what's sort of leading you and drawing you in. And the views towards Cambridge as well. So I think that's the last of our slides. Sorry, this went on long. We can go back to any image you would like if team has any questions.
Can I just say that this is Pallavi Mande, Charles River Watershed Association. This is great, Gautam. I know I saw most of the slides from the perspective of the landscape restoration strategies, but seeing how they overlay with the circulation makes it helpful to understand exactly how the two fit together. Two comments I just wanted to offer. One is obviously you're only looking at the all 8 grade option, which is something I know we all are trying to improve based on what DOT has put out. We clearly have stated formally and informally that we are not supporting that. But I think what you have come up with in terms of ways of potentially mitigating any intrusion into the river could definitely help make the case for river restoration. The second piece that I wanted to say, just from the perspective of DCR's appetite for looking at these strategies, where we know that they have been a bit resistant in terms of looking at stormwater management as a way of informing river restoration. A lot of the work that Weston Sampson has done is trying to sort of push them in that direction. I can't say that they are there yet, but the case study examples of the precedents that you referenced from Charlesgate is giving us some indication that they might get there sooner than later. So I really appreciate you using that precedent as a way to inform what's going to happen with I90. And the third piece that I just wanted to sort of put out in terms of the tolerance for intrusion into the river. I understand, and I'm not totally certain that there might be some room on the other side where BU owns some property. I know there are buildings right up against the rail infrastructure, but we are also hoping that DOT will take a good and hard look at how the entire cross-section of transportation infrastructure might be moved in tandem. And the last piece that I wanted to also say that we are looking at opportunities for using Soldiers Field Road as a part of construction phasing. So there is a possibility that the intrusion into the river as a part of the hybrid, which DOT had said the only way the hybrid can be built is by having that 8 to 10 year temporary intrusion. And we are definitely saying there has to be other ways to build this. So there are a lot of moving pieces, as you've recognized yourself, but I think this definitely moves us in a better situation to have those conversations around what river restoration means if and when they do put some circulation within the watershed. And I did take bit of a chance to invite some of our representatives from the boating community to this meeting, since they obviously have some views regarding navigation. So I would love to kind of hear that perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Wendy Landman from Walk Boston, and thank you so much. This was incredibly informative, and I so appreciate all of the pieces that went into this. It's fantastic. And I think will open some eyes. I had one question, which is, do you know, and I don't know whether you guys have done it, but whether this has been presented either formally or informally in any of its previous incarnations to MassDOT? And there may be others on the call who know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Hi, everybody. This is Glenn. Wendy, I know A Better City has not shown the whole presentation to MassDOT leadership, but we have shown excerpts from this presentation in briefings that we've given to Highway Administrator Gulliver. And I think we also showed a couple excerpts in a presentation we gave to the Secretary.
Yeah, and this is just Stacy chiming in to say that that was my understanding too, that ABC had shared a few slides here and there, but that once we felt sort of good about the composition, that we'd want to have a very sort of polite collective strategy to offer a preview before sharing anything publicly. So that's my current understanding from 15 side conversations about this.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. And then sort of the follow on is, have you had shown this to the city of Boston or the city of Cambridge?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So our intent, and Kishore, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, our goal was to help sort of bring not only the issues that we should try to get MassDOT or to recognize, but also to find a way to synthesize and visualize the consensus the stakeholder group has. And sort of this was a result of that work. So it's a result of every one of you input through these meetings that we have sort of incorporated. And I think maybe what we're getting at is a point where, okay, it's ready now. So it was not being sort of moved around. I think our turn, as Kishore and I have talked about always, is to help sort of create a vision that represents the consensus of all the stakeholders.
No, that's great. That's sort of what I thought, but I just wanted to check, as we're all having so many conversations in so many different places with different participants at each one. I just wanted to be sure that I knew kind of where this stood in that process. So it wasn't at all like what? Not yet, but just really like, where does it stand in terms of that interaction? And I guess the other one I would add is DCR, which I also assume hasn't seen it, because, you know, all of those parties are going to be obviously critically interested. Okay, thank you very much.
Wendy, can I just add to that? I mean, one of the reasons I was weighing in a little bit more than usual in terms of river restoration concepts, knowing fully well that we are not there yet in terms of supporting an at-grade option. But from CRWA's standpoint, it's really important to not only make a distinction first in terms of how this project could be permitted with DEP's very strict and DCR's very, I would say, absent views on river restoration. So my advice to this team was to explore scenarios around river restoration with being a little agnostic to which of the three options might be selected as the preferred option, knowing fully well that the transportation piece will definitely govern how much room we have to incorporate river restoration, but also multimodal connections. And the second piece, I think, which hasn't been stressed enough in this presentation, but it's something that CRWA is very interested in exploring in partnership with the BSA and BSLA folks that we've been trying to engage and have been really helpful in making this piece connect with the larger conversation around land-based green infrastructure strategies that DOT will have to incorporate if they have to get this project permitted, but also weigh in on other opportunities around controlling and managing stormwater flows from a larger drainage area. So that's something that CRWA is very actively pushing. But I think to answer your question around who's seen this presentation, I think it will be great if folks from I wouldn't say DEP, they're probably going to think this is total pie in the sky, but at least DCR to be brought into the conversation now, just to get a sense or a reality check in terms of how they might be understanding these ideas as part of their broader planning around vegetation management, erosion control, and habitat enhancement.
As a follow-up, this is Jack Wofford. Follow-up to Wendy's question, can you tell us about any reactions from Administrator Gulliver, MassDOT highway people, or the secretary to the slides that you did show them?
I'm guessing you're asking this of Glenn?
Yes.
Hi, Jack, and everybody. I guess if I were to summarize it, Jack, I came away with two thoughts. One was that under any of the viaduct options, either the so-called no build, which is really a restore in place, or the modified highway viaduct. In either of those viaduct options, my understanding is MassDOT's approach is that they're going to do nothing to the existing bank in terms of restoring it and investing in it. In other words, if they're not going to touch the river, they're literally not going to touch the river. We let them know that we didn't think most stakeholders support leaving the bank untouched. But that was definitely one thought that I came away with. The second one is it seemed as though from their body language that they understood through some of these graphics, because as most of us know, The best graphics associated with this project have not come from MassDOT. They certainly haven't come from A Better City. They've come in part from John Shields and his team, and now with Kishore and Guantam and their team. And you could see from the body language that the folks we presented to were getting it, but they didn't really say anything specific. And you kind of got the sense that they were, that was a cue from upper level leadership that they shouldn't say or get into a discussion about things that involve the river and the river edge.
Thank you.
Can anyone hear me? Am I being heard?
Yes.
Hi, this is John Shields. Gautam, I have a couple of questions. One of the things that we did and we have been doing is, trying to incorporate the ideas, number one, that CRWA has with regards to stormwater management. Number two, the analysis that you had done, particularly as it relates to the trees and shade along that river's edge. One of the things I like your presentation a whole lot, but again, it doesn't seem like we've got a lot of room for trees and such as that. We had looked at a corridor 14 feet wide that I think it did three things. Number one, it's right alongside Storrow Drive or Soldiers Field Road, and it provides a kind of a visual buffer. But you could also, it's big enough that you could get some very substantial trees in there, and you could get some shade because it is on the south side, largely on the south side of what would be the pedestrian and bike lanes. It could provide a lot of shade. Thirdly, it becomes, a good wildlife corridor, but most importantly, perhaps, it becomes a place where you could really begin to think about daylighted stormwater management going through there. And so what the position that we've kind of taken on this is that there are three things, a lot of this is about highways, but there's also the parkland and the river's edge piece, which is almost, and I think people have said it before, distinct and separate, can be separated out quite cleanly one from the other. We have, and there's a sketch around there somewhere that I think Harry has, that we have done that sort of shows what, such a rendition or such a result might be. And somehow or other, I realize that in our minds, what we're trying for right now, or what I think we're all working toward, is we all feel instinctively and probably, sort of quantitatively, that the at-grade solution is the best solution. So that's the result that we want to get out of this, number one. But number two, we do want riverbank, and it's not restoration because we don't want to bring it back to a saltwater marsh, but we do want to bring it back to a sensitive river edge that is good for the wildlife and the flora and the fauna and the people that enjoy it today and even more so in the future. We have taken an approach that there is a corridor. And I think that I think I've quantified it, that it's about 38 feet wide, that contains this kind of open space management area, the trees, the stormwater, the habitat, et cetera. Then there's a roadway, then there's there's a bikeway, then there's a buffer, then there's a strolling path, and then there's an edge of just a very few feet. And we said, that's as important as, in our minds, as is 4 lanes of highway. And so, the question is does it go into the river? Does some of it go into the river? Or can it be pulled back when lanes get reduced and such. But we'd like to keep put that notion out there and try to make that a part of the conversation, that there is a corridor through there that should be definite, just as much as Michael O'Dowd wants his, 48 or half as many feet of stuff per barrel, we want 38 or 36 or whatever the number we come up with of open space through here. And whether we get it through the DOT process, the I90 process, or it's its own separate thing, we think that the river deserves that. So I'd like to hear the comments on that.
I agree. Sorry.
Gautam, you were going to say something, but then I also wanted to say something to respond to John's idea.
Good.
My response is very short. I think if we can, absolutely, I would completely support having a minimum of 38 feet, 36 feet wide corridor. And at the minimum, absolutely, that would be the appropriate buffer with the kind of spatial dimensions you just discussed. There are two sections where it's unable to have those kind of dimensions right now. So which is what we're sort of, we're analyzing and showing that you don't have these available dimensions in these two locations. One is right by River Street, by the, where you have the stone wall, and then the other is right by the throat. It's plus or minus 400 feet. And so how do we incorporate those, in those sections? In the other areas, absolutely. I think that's what we're trying to do is it expands and contracts as required to achieve all of those aspirations that you just talked about.
You can get the dimension if you go into the river or you make fewer lanes, though.
Yeah, absolutely, you can.
Yeah.
There's actually plenty of water along the throat area. Sorry, this is Fred Ulloris talking. And there is really plenty of room. That is the widest part of the river between the basin and Watertown Dam. And it certainly is not in the way of boating at all. So the throat area can easily expand. Maybe it's not 38 feet, maybe it's 30 feet, but it's enough, you can expand enough comfortably to create an ecologically viable edge and a safe and attractive pedestrian and bicycle passage. So the only real problem is that however feet of granite wall right at the River Street Bridge. And by the way, there is 90 feet of space between the granite wall and the first opening of the arch. And that, if you're on the water, as I have been for the last 50 years, that's where all the rubbish collects. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly the most attractive and ecologically, valuable part. So there's a lot of opportunity to make really, really creative and ecologically valuable solutions along there.
Yeah, and I appreciate your subtleties because we sort of incorporated that bench, which is where all the trash is. So that's where we could, have the cantilever because then you don't have the shadow issues because you already have that existing bench there.
But it's still a place where trash can collect, and it's also a hazard for boats once you have plow supported structures in the water. That's not a safe environment for boating.
So if I may, to concur, I guess, with you, John, in terms of making space for humans and aquatic habitat and restoration, but accommodating much more room, if you will, for other uses. I think we are all supportive of increasing public use of the river and giving accommodation to, ecology. My two thoughts on that is definitely the conversation would be really helpful if we could convince DOT to reduce travel widths so we can accommodate as much of other uses and access beyond the auto access. So that's definitely a a push from CRW's perspective if they would reduce travel lanes altogether, or at least reduce the width of travel lanes. So that's a no-brainer from our perspective. But to get back to how much intrusion is okay within the river, I would just offer some thoughts from the boating community too, and maybe Kane, you can weigh in here, because one of the things that we have been trying to balance based on what DCR does or does not get excited about is a way of managing invasives, a way of managing current canopy cover, and potentially enhancing it with additional parks and open spaces, is balancing the needs of the navigational issues for the watershed. So while I know a majority of us are sort of pushing the intrusion in the river for bike and ped, I do want to make this group aware that there is as much of a pushback from the boating and the rowing community to say the watershed is also not expendable, or what I guess needs to be brought into the equation. So I'll stop here, and maybe Kane, do you want to, not to put you on the spot, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about what does happen currently?
I can jump in on that a little bit. I think as river users, we're concerned about, intrusion into the river. It is both wider and narrower through the area, of the project, right? And in the middle of the throat, there's probably a little bit of room to spare, and I am not speaking with unanimity from river users. There are certainly river users that oppose any intrusion at all into the river. But I think we're concerned about the scale of that and, what the process is, as we use the river. On the slides, it was a little unclear to me as you approach the BU Bridge, whether the shore arch is obstructed, and it kind of looked like it was. The original plan was for the boardwalk where the PDW runs now to come out. That arch is used primarily by power boaters, and the headroom in that arch is the highest, right? So if that arch gets obstructed, that cuts down on the number of power boaters that can come up into the river because they can't get under the Grand Junction Bridge. So that shore arch of the Boston shore arch of the BU Bridge is important to that section of the community.
Just to make a quick comment on that.
John, just to pause. So since it's 11 o'clock and there are a bunch of folks who haven't had a chance to comment yet, I was hoping we could also put aside the fill or not fill the river debate, because we're not going to resolve that in the next 10 minutes. And I think we're going to get where people are all at on that subject. So any comments from folks who haven't chimed in yet specific to the material that Keyshore and Gotham's teams have presented this morning, I think would be great to have at this point.
This is Laura. Harry, thanks for that. I just also want to say thank you. I think this has been some really great work to put, to break it up like this and to really see the way you can use different approaches in different sections of the throat. I think that's, well, maybe we've all been saying that. I think it's really helpful to see it and see what that could look like. So definitely thank you. And I also have to jump, but I think Paula, you and I are following up later, but maybe we can talk about how we could use this as one of the next steps to for us to maybe reach out to DCR together and think about who else should be doing that and try to get them at least familiar with the material and see if we can get them in a conversation. So thank you, and looking forward to following up.
Jack Wofford here. quickly just to say that I agree with Tony Pangaro's text message that it would be time to unveil this to the public. I think a prior step should be to have a session with DCR and perhaps with the Secretary of Environmental and Energy and Environmental Affairs. But those, I think, should happen. The presentation is ready for that. And then it's time to get it into the public sphere for open comment. It's an extremely complex set of issues, and you've presented them extremely well with some options for solutions. So thank you very much.
This is Wendy. I want to concur with the notion that it's really time to take this to start with some road shows. I think thinking about who and how is something that we've all been struggling with for a long time. Like, what's the right order of things? But I certainly think offering to the agencies, EOEA, and I also think MassDOT, we should do that sooner rather than later. And then also put it out into the public sphere so that people can understand sort of what the options are. And I mean, I hear what John was saying. I hear what Pallavi is saying. I think what you have been trying to do and have done an excellent job of doing is trying to show what could be possible within the two constraints that MassDOT has insisted on, which is don't touch the river, don't reduce the number of lanes. I think there's a lot of support in the advocacy community for different directions, perhaps certainly I think on both of those questions. But in order to, I think this is an incredibly well thought through, incredible presentation of what you could do if you were willing to actually think seriously about how to manage this things we want to get in here in the space as defined by MassDOT. And I think for many of us and many of our organizations, we're pushing perhaps on both of those things, perhaps only on one of them. But I think it's really important to get this out there because right now, I think the narrative that's out there is that you can't get a halfway decent environment if you live within those two constraints. And I think it's very important. For me, it's really important to get this out there. And we can continue having the debate. This thing is going to take years and years to design and many more years to build. But if we can't get this something out there that this can be credibly done with the at-grade solution. So, Pallavi, I do want to disagree with you. I think that it's important to present it like this and not to say that the different options are equally accommodating because the hybrid option, we think, and I realize that there may be some that believe that you could build it without going deeply into the river, but at least right now, nobody's shown anything that shows that. It's also presumably very expensive and very complicated. And the highway viaduct doesn't accomplish the other things that so many people want to be able to do, which is to have decent connections to the river and also reduce the noise impacts. And by the way, if you're going to change your mind later about how many lanes are on the roadways, if it's an all at-grade solution, that provides some opportunity in the future. If it's on a viaduct, that's it. That viaduct ain't going to get skinnier anytime. So I actually, personally, and I know this is not something the group has discussed and with the big advocacy group, I think it's actually the right approach to do this with those two constraints in place and using the at-grade alternative. So it's a fantastic set of information you guys have put together. And I think, as we've done many times, the advocates need to get together and talk about how to move this forward, but I think we should do it fast. So all of this is said off the cuff. You know, I haven't had this conversation with any of you about it, but.
Can I just add a clarification, Wendy, since I don't think I was ever saying that this is not a viable option or that we don't think that it's worth having DOT look at it and switch it out for what they have for the at-grade option. We hate that at-grade option as much as you all. from CRW's standpoint. But I think what I was trying to say, and maybe I didn't make it clear, is that if we look at river restoration as a way to drive the conversation around what an at-grade option could look like, it would look very different from what DOT has put out there. So that's the piece I was trying to clarify, because unless that river restoration piece accompanies DOT's at-grade, from CRW's point of view, that's a non-starter. So that's all I was trying to sort of formally state.
I thought you said that you were agnostic about which option, which is different from many of the other advocates. And I think
I understand that, but it's not. I just wanted to sort of say that there are three options that DOT is going to be looking at. They haven't said that they were only going to look at one option. And as you all know, all three options have pros and cons. And I just wanted to clarify that CRW is not choosing one as a preferred option just because we don't like either of the three that Mass DOT has put out there. So for us to say whether or not this option should replace Mass DOT's at-grade option, absolutely. But since that is not something that's coming from Mass DOT, I just want to clarify that the strength of having this is from our perspective, this approach is what I'm trying to say, is also valuable if it's agnostic of the three. That's all I was trying to say.
I think I did understand that, but it's a different way of approaching it than many of the other advocacy organizations have. So that's fine. We can keep having that conversation.
Sure.
It seems to me that DOT's argument that they could actually accomplish any of their things without touching the river is absolutely false in terms of the construction procedures that will be necessary to do this work. The idea that the building the viaduct or rebuilding the viaduct can be done without touching the river is, I would suggest, impossible physically and illegal. Because there are so many things that cross that property that go into the river, and the river edge is so unstable. So I don't know how to make that point to the secretary, who clearly doesn't want to hear it. But it seems that becomes part of the then ability to say, and since you are going to have to be touching the river, this is the way it ought to be done and done right.
I agree.
To be in an awkward position of disagreeing with Ken, I think there's no way that the Secretary of Transportation or Federal Highway are going to touch the river if they're not touching the river. And their view is the highway viaduct, I think, is an abomination. And I think it screws everyone. And if we want a better river edge, it's going to have to be paid for. The only dollars likely to be available are transportation dollars. And the nexus between the Allston transportation project and really making the river better is strongest with the all at grade, but it's still fairly strong with the hybrid, although it's dubious that the hybrid is constructible without being way into the river. Maybe not 120 feet as MassDOT proposed, but certainly a lot more than anything anyone's contemplating. So I think realistically, putting the highway viaduct back on the table, it was off the table last November. Putting it back on the table is a piece of vandalism. It's going to chew up, if they keep it on the table in the next round of the EIS, it's going to chew up a lot of technical resources that they're not strong at. And we ought to be able to get it down at least to the all at grade and the hybrid, or down to the all at grade, and then look realistically at what the options are. You've got, and I think these graphics, one of the great things about these graphics and the process that Kishore and Gautam have gone through is that they're not doing one cross section in the middle of the throat. They're looking at everything from River Street to the BU Bridge. And what's clear is, even if you don't like the 400 to 800 feet of throat, depending on how the transitions work, you're getting a hell of a lot of dramatically improved river. And if the price you have to pay is that you have a boardwalk in the river carrying both bikes and pedestrians for 800 feet in order to get everything else, that's a realistic choice that can be made. Arguing that the river should be fixed because God should give money to environmental agencies instead of the federal government giving it to transportation agencies is a religious discussion, but not a practical one. With anything like the laws we have and the attitudes at Federal Highway and MassDOT, it'll take pushing, but it is feasible to use transportation dollars to fix the entire river edge. And some people might like the boardwalk for the 400 feet or 800 feet, whichever it turns out to be. Some people might not like that 800 feet. But the real choice is between a much better river, I would say all of the way, or some people might say all of the way but 800. You can get that with the all-at grade. You can't get it. You absolutely can't get it with the highway viaduct. And I'm very dubious that you can get it with the hybrid. One of the most valuable things about the hybrid being in the environmental analysis is that the secretary supported it, hasn't said she doesn't anymore. And if they put honest construction costs on, by far it'll be the most expensive option. So it would put you in a position of saying, let's do the all-at grade and let's really do the river edge right, and it'll still cost less than the hybrid would have, so let's do that. So I think there's some value in the hybrid being carried in the environmental process, even though I'm totally dubious that it's a viable option. But there's no value in the highway viaduct being carried. And the sooner we could kill that, the better. It was dead, and it should not have been brought to life.
So at the risk of for once agreeing with Fred, I don't think CRWA is the only party who's even ready to look at the highway viaduct. And I agree with you. I think it's a hugely missed opportunity if that option ever gets selected. So I think you're right. We have to keep the hybrid alive and trust DOT's technical skills to make it as viable as possible. But I also want to say you're absolutely right that God is not in a position to give the money to DCR or DEP. But I was also suggesting that we look at the mitigation conversation around how this money that is transportation dollars can be put towards river restoration without necessarily getting caught up in terms of having DOT have the technical ability to do it right. So I'm agreeing with you, Fred, for the record, that the money that is going to come through transportation has to be directed to DCR and DEP so that this can be permitted, but also DCR will have the political will and leadership to direct it towards river restoration in a way that we'd all like to see.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Pallavi. Let me also say that one of the uses that these terrific graphics can provide, and I agree with the points made about getting this public as soon as possible, is right now, MassDOT has been incredibly, forget about the number of lanes, they keep widening the lanes and widening the shoulders And if you got another 10 feet from BU, you might be able to get 5 feet additional from BU. They'll throw it all into shoulder and you get nothing for the river. So having an image of how valuable the river edge can be, to push back at least at the dimensions of the lanes and the shoulders, is immensely valuable. That's a winnable fight, I think, with MassDOT. I mean, this argument that their lanes and shoulders have to be wider in this one spot when they're narrower for miles from here to South Station is bizarre. But they're getting away with it now because there's no image of the cost, the green cost at the edge of the river to that nonsense. Graphics can put us all in a position to make.
So guys, so Ari just raised his hand, and after his comment, I think we should wrap the meeting up and move on with our day.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Jeff,
Ari.
I'll be very quick. I think the best case in point of that is that the DCR has department guidelines that say no car only lane should be wider than 10 feet. And it even says things like, for a marginal increase in safety, we shouldn't be widening historic parkways. Yet the DCR itself is insisting on 11-foot lanes. So that's 4 feet right there on Soldiers Field Road, more impervious ground, wider river, and that's not even Mass Highway, that's DCR. So there's just so much, the highway has become so wide and bloated because of decisions like that, we really should be looking at that. So I echo what Fred said there.
Good. I think that's something we can all agree on, and let's just close with thanking Kishore and Gautam and their teams again. And,
thanks very much.
Thank you. It's great work.
Everyone taking part. So
I had just one quick
Sure,
comment
Kishore.
before we wind up. So it seems to me that there is an 400 to 800 feet territory that we're talking about. There are differences of opinion in terms of how to handle it, to the extent there is an grade option. So the question is, have we explored? We're not going to agree to one option. I think we may be forcing one option here. That's just a boardwalk. So to the extent that we can focus on how to resolve that through multiple options, that may be a good outcome. Maybe there is still a disagreement on the encroachment into the river. So there are options that do encroach into the river, but do better things as we have presented. But in the past, we have presented an option that is all elevated over Storer Drive inboard, so it doesn't encroach into the river at all. That provides a much more fantastic opportunity. It has other shortcomings. Again, there's not going to be a silver bullet here, but I think if we can focus on how to handle that in a way that there are options, that may be a place we can all agree to, rather than simply saying only one option exists. That's just my 2 cents here. Yeah. And maybe there is something else here.
Agreed.
I would also just add that the Big Dig provides a model for how parkland improvements can follow a major highway project as mitigation. North Point Park and North End Park are incredible. They revised the edge of the river, the Charles River in that area. They were both done as mitigation and committed mitigation from the Big Dig project. And I think that's the concept that Fred's discussion of the scarcity of resources other than highway is appropriate, because it's the highway dollars that and the rail dollars that originally created this horrible river edge, and it's time to mitigate that with highway funds.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks,
work.
Sure, thank you, God.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's great work.
Thanks, everybody.